with regard to new directions in criticism of early modern Ireland, I mean, first of all, I'll say one of the things that I could not contribute to, that I could not help with, and that is looking at Irish language sources. And I think that's key. I mean, some critics would say that if you're working in the period that I'm working on, the early modern period, you should have Latin, Greek, Irish, Gaelic, Scots, and Welsh, or you should have one of the Celtic languages. And I don't have one of the Celtic languages, but I'm involved in a large project which I think is part of that new direction, and it's a mass life writing project called McMorris, which is about mapping networks of culture and innovation and experimentation in early modern Ireland, and that will include an Irish language component that my colleague Patricia Palmer will be bringing her expertise on to the table. So that's an example of an area where early modern Ireland, and I think we're in a kind of problem, which is to translate that material does make it available to a wider audience, but in a way people are then not learning Irish in order to read it. They're not working with the original sources. So there's a kind of paradox in the fact that the Irish language experts, those who can read it, they want to enlarge that readership of people who can read in Irish, early modern Irish. On the other hand, as I say, there are important texts that just aren't been debated or discussed, so there's a kind of misfit between early modern English writing in English, whether it's by Irish or English or whoever, and early modern Irish texts, and I think there needs to be more of a connection between them. So that's one area, and that's that project. I've already mentioned the agricultural materialism, that aspect of looking more closely at issues around land use and land ownership in early modern Ireland. And I suppose one of the things to mention there again, not necessarily a new direction, but a kind of forgotten direction, which is the claim that was made some years ago by Karl Bottigheimer, an Irish historian, who talked about the fact that there wasn't really an English revolution. There was a revolution in Ireland because 2/3 of the land in Ireland changed hands between 1640 and 1660. So there's a radical claim or statement that was made that I don't think has been fully followed up on. I think it's probably now, and was later accepted by English historians, that England was not the most revolutionary of the three kingdoms of Ireland, Scotland and England. So they've accepted some of those premises, but without really looking into the extent in which something dramatic, transformational happened in Ireland. Marx had got there long before when he said that the English Republic was shipwrecked on Ireland, because that was Marx's way of saying empire wrecked the revolution. Now, empire has wrecked other revolutions since then, but I think that important sense in which 17th century political change was arrested by colonialism, was subverted by colonialism and conquest and invasion and occupation and so on, is something which has not been explored adequately. So as I say, I think there are issues around Irish language, issues around looking at how networks operated, issues around science, agriculture, medicine and various advances, because quite often we think about Ireland in the early modern period in relation to violence, in relation to chaos, famine, conflict, war, atrocity. But I think if you pull back from that, because that's all true, but also include the pioneering science that was done, the innovation, everything from draining bogs to literary innovation and translation, I think we see a bigger picture. So I think that's something that hopefully the McMorris project will bring into view, but it's something that people in their own ways, from archaeologists to Irish language experts, have been working on.
What do you think the role will be of archival and theoretical approaches to early modern studies?
I think there's a transformation underway at the moment in terms of digitisation of manuscript sources and print sources for the early modern period, because it used to be that if you were interested in theory and theoretical approaches, you might not necessarily be the same individual who was immersed in the archives and primary sources. And that was a disjuncture. You had people who were embedded in the archives doing the archival work, perhaps coming to conservative conclusions, perhaps not. And there were other people who were really led by theory, whose interest was in theory, and they were maybe less likely to engage with or engaged in a different way with those primary sources. There was also a question of access. Who had access to these privileged sites of discourse from the period? That's all changed, and it is changing. And it's been changed by things like early English books online, EBO, and other electronic archives, including journal archives. What does that mean? It means it's now much easier for people from less than members of the public, although I think that might change, but undergraduates, postgraduates, academics in all contexts can now sit at their desk and access 16th and 17th century texts in the original editions, page images, so they're seeing exactly what they would see if they went in and handled the merchandise in a library or a manuscript room or a rare books room. So I think that's definitely been a dramatic change. The archives now are becoming more accessible. That's got to change things, on the one hand. On the other hand, theory itself has undergone a transformation. In the 1980s, the high point of theory, it was hard to move without having to have a theoretical perspective. You were a deconstructivist, or you were a Lacanian psychoanalyst, or whatever, feminist. And I think all of those terms have become so complicated now and so bundled together and so mixed up that theory is also something which is changing and opening up and diversifying. So I think the relationship between archival work and theoretical work is going to be that they're both seen as richer and more diverse. To give another example, historically, and I'm interested in snobbery and elitism because I think they operate in interesting ways within academia. They operate in other places too. But within academia for a long time, the archive, the manuscript source, had a kind of special status because your average person on the street couldn't access it, couldn't tell you what was in it, couldn't speak with confidence about it. As those sources become more available, and as other sources become available, because my other interest is non-hierarchical approach to sources and archives. If you're able to see the popular material, the polemical material, the pamphlets and broadsheets of a period at the same time, right alongside the official announcements, the pompous trumpeting of emperors and kings and their lickspittles, you get a different sense of the discourse that's available. It's a bit like in the past we were only able to read the Telegraph. Now we can read all the newspapers at the same time. So I think we're moving away from an official history, a high history if you like, which was imperialist, conservative, almost by nature, not just, and I'm not here talking about, although I could, the social backgrounds of the people who were doing the history 100 years ago or 50 years ago, but there's been a transformation. Universities have opened up to an extent, not completely, but universities have opened up, the archives have opened up, theory has opened up. So I think the relationship in future between archival work and theoretical work will be much closer. It won't be a question of the posh professor with access to a particular archive telling the, jumped up postdoctoral Foucauldian that they don't know what they're talking about, because they'll both be able to instantly access the same material and as I would say, then we'll see, because everything will be out in the open. So I think that process of digitisation of archives and availability of a complete cross-section of material, not just what one aristocrat happened to think or one book collector or printer happened to consider was important. I think there's going to be a much more vibrant, varied, eclectic sense. It's almost like if you imagine the difference between social media and corporate media. I think we're now going to see a situation in which what's counts as the archive is much more diverse.